Well, hey everyone, I'm Rachel. I lead the marketing team at Valorum Reply. I'm here to help support you guys on this event logistically. We appreciate you joining us. This is the second in our webinar series dedicated to Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 Copilot. We're recording today's webinar. It'll be made available on demand, and we're here today to discuss information security and protection for Copilot. We're excited to be here and speaking with you today about how Copilot can transform your business and what data protection you can do now to accelerate your readiness and adoption. We have dedicated time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions, so we encourage you to enter those questions you have throughout the presentation into the chat window, and we'll address them at the end. So without further delay, I'll hand it over to Caitlin, who can kick us off.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. All right, so a quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to be going over briefly what AI in the modern workplace looks like, where Copilot fits in, and then we'll dive into what security and data protection looks like for Copilot and your organization, including addressing risks and threats to data and what you can start doing today. As Rachel said, we're going to leave some time for questions, so please do use the Q&A function as we will be monitoring those. My name is Caitlin Kelly, and I'll be sort of a little bit of your host today. I'm an adoption change management consultant with our modern work team, really focused on the people side of technology. But I am joined today by our resident security expert, Steve Lazar, and I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Steve Lazar. I'm obviously security solutions consultant, working with Caitlin, kind of assisting on the Copilot engagement to prepare the environment and make certain that what's getting put into place is secure and that environments are ready before we put things in.
Awesome. As Rachel mentioned, this is the second in our series of webinars about Copilot for Microsoft 365. If you missed the first, you can absolutely catch it on demand. We've got our Valorum Reply YouTube channel. You can always keep up with all of our upcoming events at valorumreply.com/events. We've got some great topics coming up dedicated specifically to Copilot, including enabling Copilot adoption, which, as an adoption change management consultant is a very important topic for me, and how we excite and engage employees with this new technology. And I'll be sharing some more information alongside my ACM colleagues on that session in June. And then we've got Extending Copilot, featuring some of the work that we've done to bring Copilot's power and our third-party tools together using things like graph connectors, plugins, and Copilot Studio. So be sure to register for these events as well. We have the QR codes and the links there, so you can go ahead and click those, check out more of these topics. As a quick introduction of ourselves, so we are Valorum Reply. We're a Microsoft-focused consultancy that really prides itself on delivering exceptional modern work tools, security, and Azure services. Though we are particularly focused on the Microsoft stack, we are part of the larger Reply group with, think about now, 200 highly specialized consultancies across the globe, each with a specialization on a really specific technology. So in total, we're about 15,000 geeks strong. So we've got an incredible network of technology specialists. At Valorum Reply, we have a close partnership with Microsoft. So we were really lucky to be part of the early access and jumpstart programs for Copilot. We're also a qualified partner to deliver many Microsoft-funded opportunities, including things like their Copilot workshop or sessions like Adoption Factory. So as I said, I'm part of the modern work side of the house, and really what makes Valorum Reply so unique in this space is that we have our modern work team and we have our security and Azure side. So we're really fully equipped to support organizations on the whole of Microsoft, but especially Copilot. So enough about ourselves. Let's dive into our session today. Before handing it over to Steve, I do want to take a minute to discuss AI in the modern workplace. As many of us are really coming to understand, AI isn't going away. The improvement we see every single day from generative AI tools like Copilot are truly transforming how people are working, and they don't want to go back. The 2024 Work Trend Index annual report came out recently and showed that, some insights that aren't really that surprising. So in the last 6 months alone, usage of AI tools at work has nearly doubled. 3 out of 4 people say they currently use AI at work, and almost half of them started using it less than 6 months ago. Adoption rates for AI are above and beyond what we've seen with previous technology. So people are taking the tools, they're adopting them quickly, and they're really changing the game. So it's really exciting, but there's kind of another side to these statistics. Employees are taking matters into their own hands when it comes to AI. So that same study showed that 78% of AI users are bringing their own AI tools into work. And this is an average statistic among generations. So no matter someone's age or experience, people are going out and looking for their own AI tools and using them with company data. But because they're bringing in their own tools, over half of them say that they're reluctant to tell their employers about it. And then nearly half of them are worried that if their companies find out that they're using their own AI tools to help complete their tasks, that their leaders will think they're replaceable. Now, other studies have shown us that leadership is much more interested in retaining a neutral headcount rather than replacing employees with AI. And anecdotally, we've seen organizations who want to help their employees grow into new opportunities and roles rather than lose employees. But if companies aren't investing in these AI tools that can drive innovation and lead to creativity and growth, then they're missing some really incredible opportunities. And Steve, what interests me most about these numbers is the idea of bringing your own tools into the workplace. What kind of risks are we talking about when we're bringing in outside tools like that?
Anytime that a employee introduces a new variable into an environment, be it a new product or a new piece of hardware, it's the development of potential risks. It's considered the classic shadow IT. This is just the next generation of shadow IT in a company today. These tools they're being brought in, they're unmonitored, they're unknown, and you don't know what they're opening your environment up to, and you don't know what's escaping from your environment into the wild from and through these tools. So it's ideal for a company, especially companies that have not yet done so, to invest in a CASB solution that monitors and manages what programs and solutions their employees are using, and to not only do that, but then to stay ahead of the curve by being prepared and at least aware of modern technical advances in putting those into place before employees have to do that, just to free up time in their day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, luckily, that tees us up pretty well to talk about Copilot for Microsoft 365, right? So those are excellent points. You're opening yourself up, and you have no idea sort of then what your data's at risk with there. But if we're already leveraging the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, then bringing in a tool that is sort of already built in and inherits those securities and permissions can help some of the protection that comes along with it. But when we're talking about Copilot, we're also talking about a lot of potential tools, really. So Microsoft's growing AI lineup is built upon that foundational Copilot experience. Many of us have personally seen it through, what was previously called Bing Chat. And then we add your organization's E3 or E5 licenses, and then we get that nice commercial data protection. So, helping keep that private information private. And then what's great about Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that you take that foundation, and then of course we're adding enterprise security, privacy, and compliance into the fold, ensuring that Copilot isn't out there surfacing a lot of data that maybe it shouldn't. And then, of course, you get, your Copilot for business functions like sales, service, or finance, bringing in data and information from Dynamics 365, Salesforce, ServiceNow, or SAP. So building on top of all the security from for Copilot for Microsoft 365, and just sort of bringing in that extra data that your employees need. So then to look more closely at Copilot kind of under the hood, we see a pretty complex structure at play. To really simplify it, Copilot is using the graph and the semantic index of your organization to formulate a response to your prompt, and then it's using the large language model to transform that response into new and original content using natural language. And thinking back to that chart that we just saw, it's important to remember that Copilot is using the settings that are already in place in your organization. So if, I work in marketing and I don't have access to HR data in files, then Copilot won't be able to retrieve it for me. And we see that beautiful dotted line around the edge, that service boundary, that tells me that the data in my organization should be staying there, and it's not necessarily we're not training the model or anything like that. So on a surface level, we see a pretty secure system. But what I really, and I do want to point out that this is kind of inherently secure in many ways. Copilot doesn't on its own create security risks, but what it can do is put a really strong magnifying glass to the risks that are already present within your organization. So, Steve, as we think about this sort of process, where do you sort of immediately identify, what risks might be out there?
Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, and I think that was one item you pointed out, and I want to highlight is that M365 service boundary. These risks are not external risks. There's no additional exposure, but these are the risks that exist within your environment that are going to be not just magnified, but then have a big spotlight shown on them. And we'll start with the first one, which is that user prompt. You need to control and understand that input. Prompt engineer is one of the new job classifications that's out there, which is somebody that will actually know and trained on how to write proper user responses. You want to be certain that that input coming in from the outside environment or just outside of the service or application, it's not going to introduce code, and that has occurred in the past by people that have not done this on non-Copilot products. Then you need to check the fringe behavior. There was in testing for one product, they had it give out 5,000 hellos. And near the end of it, it just started spitting out the financial data of the salary data, actually, of the financial department. Not really what you want to have your people to be able to see. Case samples like that really indicate that just that user response and being able to control that user prompt of input needs to be there. Moving on then into those processing phases, you have to understand what's going on. You can't, we believe in a zero trust environment nowadays. It's kind of clichéic to say it, but it's been the development of security over time. And by saying zero trust, what it really means is understanding and validating and knowing before just blindly going forward with it. So you have to be certain to know what and who has access to those pre-processing, post-processing, and in-process pieces. So you want to lock those down, make certain that there's no injection or what is usually referred to as a service side or a supply chain attack, making certain then that those processing pieces aren't being updated or changed. And again, that might not be intentional or somebody coming in from outside of your environment, but it could be internal of somebody trying to help and just making an accidental mistake or closing something. Back in the day when we were talking sort of routers and hubs, if you recall, if you didn't write the memory on the router and you rebooted it, it would forget all of the routes that you just pre-programmed in. It wasn't intentional, but it was accidents that happened that would cause massive network damage. Similar thing here. Someone comes in, updates a process, doesn't have a full validation, leaves off a semicolon or something, and that can have massive consequences well beyond what was expected because of the minutia of the error. Then you go into the third area here, which is we're looking at that MS graph. Like Caitlin said, your HR, you don't have access to, or marketing, you don't have access to the HR data. Or do you? Have you implemented a product such as Purview? Do you have your data classification and your context and your data locked down? This is a common thing in a lot of companies which have a lot of data out there inside of these different containerized areas in the cloud, and they haven't yet fully classified, categorized, or set up your data protections around them. And the result can be, again, not intentional, simply not well thought out as far as the peripherals and what I like to refer to as the unexpected consequential actions of this behavior. You might not have that fully fleshed out controls around your data, much like when we implemented SharePoint back in the early years, but it occurred, and suddenly you would have the pay structure, or hey, maybe the meeting notes about an upcoming merger or acquisition would come out, or even a memo that you thought was private between two people isn't. And the next thing you know, people are wondering, hey, are you really looking to downsize or different, things that are coming up or within the company? That can lead to a lot of problems, not just internally with your reputation, the trust between the company and the IT staff, but also exposure that can be leaked externally and really needs to be addressed before you turn these products on. It's more, just double checking that the oven's off before you leave the house type of a model. The final one here, or the second to final one, is looking at the large language model itself. You want to be certain that when you make those decisions, what is putting out in that large language model, what it's translating into English is appropriate. English is a complex language, and sometimes words that a computer might sit there and say, oh, that means the same thing, doesn't. And then it can cause confusion, and it can cause some those unintended consequences because of that. The other thing is you want to protect against is referred to as dreaming or drift. And that's just where the computer's processing will spit something out that is kind of sort of not really what it should be doing. Setting that up in that response check is just to check it and make certain that what language it's using, what variations it's using are coming out of that is appropriate and proper for what your company is doing and the language of your industry. And that kind of leads back to that number 6 there, those responses. You want to check the input coming in. You want to be certain to check the output going out. You really don't want a response that's that's harmful to the company coming out. You don't want profanity. You're not necessarily going to want to have it say something that it shouldn't. There was a case, kind of famous, of one product that was respectively telling somebody that they should have self-harm. Not really the appropriate response that you want your AI to be responding with. I've seen cases where they have not controlled those Microsoft graph pieces and around the data, and the product for one car company recommended a different car company's product as the result response as the appropriate piece to purchase. Again, not really what you're looking for to come out of this type of product, especially for marketing, sales, or even internal exposure on somebody who's just trying to make a company presentation on what we're doing, what our plans are for the next year, stuff like that. So you want to know what's going on here, and in each one of these environments, you want to have encoding there. In app dev coding, call it kind of more of a cutout, just to do safety checks or any type of validation when this is going on. That in turn is going to help you get that point to say, hey, we've added new data, we've opened up new things, we've acquired a new company, making certain that those policies are applied to it, and there's been no change to any point of this to what's been given out and the impact to the user base internally, and then what's potentially exposed outside.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to go ahead and then pass it over to you, Steve, to go much more in depth into what we can do and how we can solve some of those risks.
So thank you very much, Caitlin. Now, as noted, your key risks are really your data overexposure, your data loss, and data non-compliance. And these types of things result not just in technical issues, but in company reputation, exposure, fines. There could be inadvertently trade data leak that's going to, cause issues with the SEC, stuff like that, depending on where your business is. So by addressing those things, controlling your data, you're ensuring that you're not going to violate any compliance or regulatory rules. That's key, and the key to that is a product such as Microsoft's Purview, or something that's going to classify, label, and then allow you to manage and control your data rolling forward. And that's it. Again, that just helps against internal exposure and potential threats from an internal source. potentially also it needs to be recognized is that overall threat targets on data are growing. This is something that is going to be exponentially grown as the potential risk is there and other people are getting into it and potential exposure. Not even conscious potential exposure, but just maybe, you know, something that was considered innocuous internal is not innocuous when it's exposed out. And you have additional threat actors now that are going into environments and coming into them. So you really need to have a mitigation that you have to have in place. And there is a high return on that. It's unfortunate that it's not necessarily seen in terms of new dollars brought in, but it does have a high risk factor of the amount of damage that it's going to do to your company if you don't have that. So organizations that protect themselves before that attack shows up are really going to be in a well-placed idea so that they're not exposing themselves to any at-risk or high-risk data losses or exposure before this is even brought in. And ways to do that really just are basic security hygiene, multi-factor authentication, applying those zero trust principles, knowing where your data is, knowing to protect your data, and putting things such as data loss protection, data classification, data labeling, beginning today to build out what you're going to do, not just with we call SITs or sensitive information types, but also looking at how that data is used with trainable classifiers, keeping things in place, patching. We've been saying that since forever. You have to patch systems. You need to do that in the cloud as well, and to make certain that your endpoints are protected. Setting up an endpoint like XDR that's integrated into the environment. All of these very basic, more classic or legacy, but just, you know, kind of common sense today, security protections secure your environment against 99%. I think the actual number is somewhere like 98.26% of all attacks are protected based on the reports that have come out from the digital defense. It changes year to year, but the number of attacks are going up, and they're still identifying that just these basic hygiene principles will protect against them. Now, the steps to address Copilot risks and threats really come down to this. Just again, that safety hygiene. Check your M365 security posture. With you being in Azure and the Microsoft product suite within the entire environment, you have the opportunity to use these tools. A lot of that is your security score. Check your security score. Look at the overall and then look at each of the individual pieces. Your Entra, your Purview, and then your Cloud Defender, Cloud App, etc. And those will give you hints on where you are. If you can just reach a security score, it doesn't have to be 100%. Every percentage point going up is going to increase your basic fundamental security. And this will exponentially improve your security posture the more you go up to. I think the average, if I recall on this, is somewhere along a 67, 69% is going to give you an 80% return as far as like your security baseline. Just something as basic as putting in multi-factor authentication for everybody is like a huge jump to how and where your attackers are coming in. Putting in DLP, 67%. Putting in a DLP policy is going to be a huge jump in protecting from inadvertent exposure in such a fashion that you can place encryption on your data. That means that even if somebody gets the data, they don't and can't actively do anything once they have the data. That basic pieces are going to effectively raise your protections and value regardless of it. And again, these are basic fundamental security hygiene pieces. This isn't something like going out and investing in something massive. A lot of this is available with just your E3 and your E5 licensing that you need to have. just to have Copilot. So if you're looking at doing Copilot, you're going to have these advanced licenses. You might as well use the rest of it as well to ensure that this is protected. You're developing it and deploying it initially with an E3, and then when you put in an E5, that's going to give you the automation around it. That's kind of the big differences there. There's other things we would highly recommend going at the end of your journey with an E5, simply because it's going to give you all of it. And this is on all of your organizational data. Anything that's within the Azure environment or the M365, O365 locations or services is covered. One of the big things with that is including the schematized data as well. So it's not just your Word, Excel, it's also your schematized data then that you keep inside of your SQL databases can be identified and things within Azure, which is kind of a newer fundamental piece that's been developing over the past year. Once you go beyond that, is to continue this. And again, security is a journey. It's not a end state. You have to maintain and continue it. So, you do your discovery, you develop your classification, you test it, you put it in place for your standard product line, Word documents in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange. Then you extend that to do the SaaS apps, and you can extend that even further to do your SQL, your data lakes, your containerized, schematized data. But then you can circle that all the way back around as your business develops and as technology develops and changes to improve that security posture at the policy level, and it will trickle all the way back down through. And as Caitlin said, those policies get fed through it. So it's an end-to-end. You update the policy for the new advances at the beginning, and it will propagate through the environment. Much like Copilot propagates through everything, these policies propagate through and improve everything. Now, how to manage available data on Copilot. And something, Caitlin, I think you want to point out, or we pointed out, is when you use Copilot, you need to know where it pulls that data from. And the layout of default M365 Copilot, and I want to focus on this because there's 12 different Copilots out there right now live, is M365 Copilot pulls everything from OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, Teams as its primary sources of data. And why those different data classifications are important is because you could have an innocuous memo talking about the potential of making a change in your Exchange. And if you don't have data protection on your email, that memo might be included in, say, a marketing report or an HR report about what's coming up, and be exposed in that report to people that weren't privy to that conversation. So it's important then that you have those controls around your semantic index so that the data that is exposed, the data then that Copilot can leverage and use, is what you are telling it can leverage and use, and not just, hey, we'll open the books and let it have everything. We don't want to put something in place that's going to necessarily cause problems that don't need to be there, either from a technical perspective or even from an internal perspective of employee morale. So when you start talking about that, now you need to look at what you're going to do about it. Start with your E3. Configure your common conditional access policies, set up your classifications, set up your data protection based on those sensitivity labels on those classifications, apply those risk level labels, and that will determine your encryption and who can access different things. That's very fundamental. There's just a standard E3 can allow you to at least build that out and set it up, test it, validate it, get it in place, and get it as part of a security-minded culture within the company, even before looking at investing in an E5 for everybody or setting up automation. And it will allow people to become comfortable with it, comfortable with doing multi-factor authentication, even more comfortable going forward with passwordless authentication, which is even better. A lot of companies are concerned on it, but they shouldn't be. Setting that up, setting up those common conditional access pieces, such as not allowing or managing how devices in your data work when it's an unmanaged device. Managing your devices. Identity is not just people. Identity is devices too. So you've got to set that up for both with Intune, Cloud Defender, or Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender XDR. There's an entire suite called Defender, so there's a whole bunch of stuff there. And those M365 apps and leveraging the data inside of those with Purview. Just those two pieces combined with Intune and Entra really will leverage that, again, without even having to go to that automation, and will provide that fundamental basis, which that step up when you're ready for it into that automation will force zero trust to everybody across the board, and then you don't have to manage it as much. You're going to start decreasing your cost on personnel because you're not having to go in. You're freeing up your security people's time to go focus on more important things like investigations and not just having to change passwords. As mentioned, these are the additional pieces talking about the devices, threat protection, Exchange Online, M365 Defender. Each of these, as you go through, are going to improve on that stance. Eventually, what you want to do is you want to be in this scenario, which is where you have all of these different pieces integrating together, focusing on providing an end-to-end secured environment under the basis of zero trust policy, but providing defenses that leverage each other. So it's a layered defense in depth based on zero trust principles that will provide you the best solutioning across the entire environment, and regardless of where you are within the environment. So kind of rolling forward, what's the call to action? What do we need to do? How do we get this? First, set it up. Identify your key critical aspects. Most companies, you've got the classic 80-20 rule. 20% of all value is the key thing that you want to protect on your most sensitive protections. Set that up first. Once you have that, then you want to roll that out to the rest of the internal company stuff, and eventually you want to set up for most teams, it's that baseline. Once you do that baseline for all, you've kind of covered that end to end. A lot of people would go reverse. We kind of go the other direction in security, and the sole reason is because if somebody gets into your email and they take the menu for lunch that's passed around, that isn't a big deal. But if they take a memo out of email that's involving to say next year's enhancements or the direction the company's going, that's a much bigger deal. One of those needs to have protection right away. One doesn't. So you really want to look at where you're going to focus your initial efforts and then where you're going to grow them to improve your security posture across the entire company. For Copilot readiness, we're here to help. We can come in, do an initial assessment. It takes about 4 to 5 weeks. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at where you are, what's your security score, what you've done, what things have you implemented, what have you turned on, what things have you implemented and not necessarily turned on, what things are turned on but not fully configured, or that you haven't implemented it to the highest degree. I like to refer to it as like when my mom in high school would give me a day timer. It's great. I've got a collection of them. They're empty. It did me no good, but it was something that my mom tried to do to help me to learn. This is the same thing. You need to be ready and prepared in actually using these products. So this assessment will come in, look to see, hey, do you have it? Do you have the license for it? Have you installed it? Have you configured it? If not, what can we do to set you up for a roadmap and a recommendation of what to put in what order to give you that biggest bang for the buck to prepare you for Copilot, so that when you turn Copilot on, you get the benefits of all the enhances that Caitlin was talking about without any of the bad stuff that I'm talking about potentially coming along. And within Valorum, as Caitlin mentioned, we are one of the Microsoft global partners across every area of Microsoft. Within the security competencies, we are a Microsoft partner in both clouds and all cloud security, identity access management, threat protection, the entire platform. And that's something that we here at Valorum Reply really focus on. We like to have that, and we go for that security culture, which you talked about, mentioned earlier. And that is where at every layer, if we're doing a development project, if we're talking about the Copilot that Caitlin's been mentioning, we have security baked into what we do. Standard operating procedure is to ask, what's the risk in doing this? Are we doing this because we could, because we should? And what is the benefit and what is the potential risk on that occurring? So on the service areas to align with that, we do security at cloud speed. It's like our manager likes to say that. It sounds cool when he does it. But it's essentially our security team here is we're constantly staying up to date. The development of Copilot, we wanted to see, okay, how does this work? How do we do it? As Caitlin mentioned, as a Microsoft partner, we get advanced access to it. That comes to our team and we say, this is really cool. This is awesome. This is neat. How can we break it? So we go through and we look at it on a fundamental basis. What's the zero trust built around it? Because that's going to give you your compliance requirements. Then we look at every aspect, your endpoints, devices, and identity. It kind of builds out from those to say, okay, how's your ingress, egress? What does this impact? Then we look at what the information, what is this going to do with the key components of a company? What's the overall threat protection? And then finally look at the cloud security engineering to say, hey, what can we do to design and build this so that we can bake this into every product line, everything that we do as a default setting? So that when we finally do, we work with companies to do it, it isn't a one-off, it's baked into the products that we work with you on, as well as a completely separate, we can come in and just focus on that as well, depending. So when you get a product from us, it's already secured. When we work with you on a product, we're going to just have security as one of the fundamentals that we look at. And then in addition to that, we can come in and assist you with how we're going to do that security from end to end.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, I love that showing this slide because really showcasing all of the services that we provide. But I know that so many organizations are so excited to use AI, but more and more we're seeing so many security related questions come up. So it's really nice to see you kind of go through not only what we need to consider, but then where we can get started, sort of where we are already, what type of licensing you have, and what are sort of the actions that we can start taking. So that was amazing. Thank you. So just to kind of quickly cover what we covered today, we walked through some of the recent statistics about AI in the workplace, right, including the tools that folks are bringing in without their companies knowing and potentially opening them up to, potential huge data risks. From there, we discussed Copilot, so understanding the inherent security benefits of bringing in a Microsoft tool into the Microsoft system, but then knowing where it can uncover insecure data. We, of course, talked about what needs to be protected, what we need to consider when talking about AI security, and then where you can get started depending on your current licensing, kind of your current concerns at the moment. So a little bit to what Steve said as well. Obviously, we have our service areas that align to all of the various Microsoft solutions. We also have what we consider a compass framework here at Valorum Reply that's really designed to meet you where you are. So as we know, Copilot is so much more than just kind of flipping on a switch. So whether you are really starting at the beginning and looking for that early leadership enablement to get those leaders on board with a secure generative AI tool, or maybe you're needing some more of that hands-on assistance to improve your data posture, our incredible security team is here to help you with that. And then, of course, once you are prepared, you've got your leaders on board, you're feeling in a really comfortable, secure place, we can help you with plenty more offerings around deployment, pilot engagement, full-scale training and adoption, and then, of course, how we extend Copilot. And so kind of no matter what stage you're at, we also have a couple of different options for you here. So the first, of course, is a 30-minute virtual consult with a Copilot specialist. So if you feel like you are not sure where to start and you want to talk through some of your concerns, you can click the link there and it'll take you to a little form to fill out so that we can, pair you up with the right person from our Valorum Reply team to be able to talk through some of your concerns and make some recommendations based on where we think you might need to go next, including whether we can look to maybe, some smaller engagements, whether we can bring on the Microsoft team to help work together in that space. But again, it's a free Copilot consult. I highly recommend you clicking on that and filling that out. And of course, Steve, you did mention the security readiness assessment previously. Of course, it's that 4 to 5 week session. So a really comprehensive report of your risks, that secure score, and that recommendation roadmap. So again, really getting you up and running in a really positive technical space. So would love to stop here and see if there are any questions in the Q&A or if there's any other questions that have just come up.
Nothing yet, Caitlin. I don't see anything in the Q&A. You guys feel free to drop any questions you do have there now.
Mm-hmm. I see a question come in about, can we lock down certain portions of our data from being discovered by Copilot? Steve, do you have any immediate thoughts on that?
Yes, the way that Copilot works is much like anything else. It uses a identity then, and you can set that identity. Let's say user account, but people just call it a user account sometimes. But you can set it from ensuring to say it has access to these things. You can also set your data to say, hey, this data is only available to these set people. Usually it's an opt-out or an opt-in model, but you simply include Copilot as you would any other user or application to say it has access to these areas and this data, or it doesn't.
Awesome. I also know that right now there's restricted SharePoint search as well. So if if you don't need to necessarily get to a user population, but rather want to lock down SharePoint sites, sort of to turn that off for discoverability.
Yes, you can through the SharePoint admin console or in your classification sensitivity labels actually choose the SharePoint service area or location and set that up. In fact, you can actually go in and set up not just by SharePoint as a whole, but you can set it up by per site or per hub controls over it to ensure that, hey, these sites are going to be for external consumption, these sites are for internal company consumption, and these sites are for executive or managerial consumption, and kind of build that out so that it can only be viewed then by those specific audiences and allows you to really control your data. And of course, SharePoint leads also into Teams and can also then be leveraged the same way then that you do your OneDrive so that it's extendable across your data locations on the back end.
Steve, while we've got some time, one question that we often get from organizations is talking about some of the extra materials that are created with Copilot. So folks who are turning on recordings and transcriptions to then be able to leverage Copilot to summarize meetings and things like that. Obviously not wanting to create so much data sprawl. Do you have any sort of immediate recommendations about those sort of concerns?
Data sprawl's always been an issue since the first time we saved data to off of paper. It was a problem when we had paper. The main key ways to do it is set expiration dates, doing your data retention labeling. You can set up your data retention a lot of times not just based on time, but also last checked. You're going to want anything that's mentioned that is a compliance piece set for a certain time, but then anything that isn't as critical, have it go away after a certain period of time, especially if it hasn't been touched. I like to point out that, you can't always just do that by if it hasn't been touched in 30 days or 90 days, always remember your end of month, end of quarter, end of year reporting. and availability, but you shouldn't really keep anything that is not compliance required beyond the compliance date. And even then, and then the earlier stuff you shouldn't keep beyond a maximum of 1 year for utilization. And again, it's not when it was created, it's when it was last actually utilized. So living documents will continue to exist within a company that's using them, whereas non-living documents will kind of just disappear, and you back them up to disk and or tape, and you can recover them as needed that way.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. We have a question here for employees using an unauthorized bring your own AI tool. How should they navigate getting access to Copilot at their workplace?
Have the conversation with your manager, have a conversation with your IT team, bring it up with your internal process.
Mm-hmm.
What's key though is willingly disclosing that you're using an unapproved AI product and coming forward with that. A lot of that's going to depend on your company and then the impacts of doing so. And if you want to, it's almost a direction to say to champion that within your own company, to say, hey, this I've done this. I see now the risks. How do we mitigate this? And how can I, as a employee of the company, help?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're already working with an E3 or E5 license, you do have access to that Copilot for the web with that commercial data protection. So I would encourage anyone who's already done the, BYOAI process there with generative AI to start exploring Copilot for the web, knowing that that data is secure, and then, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the capabilities there compared to whatever else you might be bringing into the fold. And then, like Steve said, using that to champion. Amazing. Well, feel free to keep populating some questions in there. Steve and I will hang out for a bit, but I do want to go ahead and thank everyone for their attendance and participation. So I'm going to leave these QR codes up here for our upcoming webinars, because obviously now that we understand the necessary data protection, we can then accelerate our use of Copilot. So time to start considering how we bring our employees along with the change. So we'll be going over those best practices and adoption methodologies for our Enabling Copilot Adoption webinar in June. And then, of course, looking at how you increase Copilot's impact through extensibility. So very excited to showcase, extending Copilot in action in July. And though we have these webinars coming up, you can always reach out to us to discuss these topics at any time. So, our personal emails are listed here. You can also reach out to the marketing email listed below, so we can start connecting you with the right Copilot specialists and see how, you can get started using Copilot today. Other than that, if anyone has any other questions, please do drop them in the Q&A. But I do want to say thank you so very much for attending. And if you don't have any questions, have a wonderful rest of your day.